Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Matt back with another video. Today I'm accompanied by every single lens that I own. You might say, hey, what about the lens that you're filming with? And to that I say I borrowed this 18-55 Fujifilm kit lens from my friend to put on my camera so I can have my 18-55 kit lens as a part of the collection. So this is all of my lenses included right here, and I just want to talk about every single one of them, what I use them for, which ones I use more than others. This is a video that you guys wanted to see. I put out a poll on my community tab asking if you wanted to see the 16mm review, the TT Artisan 23mm review, or just to see every single lens that I own. Now, I should mention that I will have reviewed lenses in the past that are not in this lineup because this is all the lenses that I have right now. I don't keep every single lens that I come by. I buy and sell lenses a lot, so don't take it personally if I used to have a lens that you really liked and I ended up selling it. That's just how it goes. I'm not that sentimental about my gear. I like to try things out, try new things, and I can't just hold on to everything. That's just ridiculous. I mean, look how many lenses I have right now. If I had kept every one that I ever bought, this would be twice this size, so that's just not practical. So let's talk about, these are all my Fujifilm autofocus lenses. These are Fujifilm manual focus lenses to here, and then these are all M42 vintage lenses, these four. So I'll just talk about every single one of these lenses, what I use them for, what I use more than others, what I don't really use, and yeah, that's all it's going to be. I might show you, I'll try to show you some pictures from each one. There's some of these vintage lenses down here that were actually my grandma's lenses, and that's why I won't sell them, but they're not the best lenses in the world, so I don't shoot with them, and I might not have an example of an image from them, so that's just a fair warning. So starting with probably my favorite Fujifilm lens right off the bat, the 16mm f1.4, beautiful. Absolutely love this lens. I got a pretty good deal on it. I think I bought it used for $600-ish. They're worth $1,000 brand new. And people for a long time have said that this is Fujifilm's best lens. It might not be your favorite focal length, but I do have to admit, a lot of people, there's a reason that they say that this has a certain magic to it. I ended up buying this, and shortly after thinking, should I get the 18mm 1.4? I don't have the money for that, to be honest, but I think I can live with this 16mm 1.4. I love the perspective it gives. It's a great wide-angle video lens without having too much distortion. So if I'm shooting in a tight environment, this comes in clutch. Get it? The clutch focus. Clutch. Anyway, another reason I didn't get the 18mm 1.4 is because I just decided to rebuy this 18mm f2. This is a pancake lens from Fujifilm. It is so tiny without the lens caps or anything. I love it. I ended up selling this in the past because I had a hard time with the focal length, and I heard in a YouTube video that it's the same focal length as my phone, and ever since I had this like mental thing like, oh, if it's like a phone, I want to differentiate my pictures from a phone, but it's about the composition. It doesn't matter if it's the same focal length that phones have. I ended up rebuying it because after I had this 16mm and I was thinking about getting the 18 1.4, I was like, man, this 16mm, it's awesome. It has a great minimum focus distance, but the problem is it's just a hard field of view to work with. You just have to get used to it. And I was thinking if this was just a little bit tighter, just not as wide, just a little bit, then I would like it more. So I decided, instead of buying the 18 1.4 and selling this, because I do like the 16, I decided to buy this 18 f2 to have the focal length and also to just have a small lens, because you'll see all these other Fujifilm lenses. I've sold off all the small ones I've had. I had the 23 f2 before and the 27mm pancake. I ended up selling them all off and having these bigger, fast lenses. So I wanted to have another small lens again so I could just go out and shoot for fun. Next, we have the 18-55 kit lens from Fujifilm. It is the only first-party autofocus zoom that I have, and probably will have for a long time. This is a great value. I really don't use this for photography. I use this for video, basically only on a gimbal, because I shoot on a Fujifilm X-T3. I have two X-T3s, and they don't have in-body image stabilization or IBIS. but this lens does have OIS, or optical image stabilization. So even though my camera itself doesn't have stabilization, I can slap this lens on, and that gives me a little extra smoothness when I'm on the gimbal. Because even when I have the camera on the gimbal, there's still some micro jitters without some sort of stabilization in your lens or in your body. So that's basically the only reason I use this. It is a 2.8 at the wide end, f4 at the long end. Not particularly fast. I guess by all these other lenses, you're going to see that I like fast lenses. This is the 33mm f1.4. I got a really good deal on this recently. I haven't properly reviewed this yet. I did compare it against my old 35 1.4, which I did sell. Don't get butthurt over that. That was just my personal choice, and it doesn't make sense to have both. But I did actually, that's why I got this 18f2, because that 35 1.4 was like compact, and now with this thing, like I don't want to just like carry this around. What if it gets damaged? It's like in pristine condition. I got it in, and this is going to last me a long time. Anyway, this 33 1.4 is really great. I would say it's more of a practical lens to have more than anything. Of course, I do enjoy shooting it with it. It does have great image quality. The 50mm field of view, it's just like a workhorse field of view, I think. Generally, I prefer to shoot wider whenever I just have a walk around lens. The autofocus is amazing. I just feel like I just need to use it more. I think I'm gonna use it a lot more for professional jobs and stuff, because I'm gonna be afraid, at least for maybe a year of owning it, to carry it around just for fun, just in case it gets damaged or stolen, because it's, I think, my most expensive lens that I have here. I think I paid actually about the same for the 16mm and the 33mm, and they're probably my two best lenses, to be honest. The next lens I got is the Viltrox 56mm f1.4. This is an autofocus lens, but it's not a first-party Fuji lens. This is a 1.4. It's really a portraiture lens. It's like an 85mm full-frame field of view equivalent. You'll notice that all of these are basically these 1.4 lenses. The 16 is a little bit beefier, but basically the kit lens is the same size as this, and that's the same size as the 33. That's a good size of a lens, so a lot of my lenses are in that size, and I'm happy with that. But this Viltrox 56, I don't know. I never really use it. It's just, I guess I don't like 85mm that much, because the reason is, well, first of all, this lens has failed on me a couple times where it overheats. I did a review on it, and I said that this lens stopped working in hot conditions because it seemed like it just wasn't focusing because it overheated. It wasn't that my camera overheated, even though someone commented this. They're like, no, your camera overheats, not the lens. The lens itself is what overheated, because I just slapped another lens on the camera and it worked fine. I didn't have any overheating warnings on my camera, but all of a sudden in hot conditions, this lens just stops focusing and the aperture stops working properly. So I can't really trust this lens. I'm thinking about getting rid of it, and I don't know, I just never really use it. Maybe I'd replace it with a 56 1.2 from Fujifilm, and maybe I'd like that more. This does have sharp images and stuff, but I don't know. I guess I have a bad taste in my mouth about it. But a big reason I don't use that much for portraiture is because this is my go-to portraiture lens, this big boy, the Viltrox 85mm 1.8. And I guess this is my biggest, beefiest lens, even though it's not very heavy for its size. It's actually surprisingly light, and I like that about it. But this gives a much better compression than the 56. This has a 130mm equivalent field of view, so you're getting really great compression. You can take a full body portrait of somebody with this lens and still have them separate from the background. With these wider focal lengths here, even the 33 1.4, it's a 50mm equivalent. The 1.4 is nice. You can get some nice blurry backgrounds if maybe you're from the waist up, you're doing like a headshot or something with it. But once you get to a full body portrait, the distance, just because of the focal length, there's not a lot of separation from the background, but this having that extra compression from the 85mm or equivalent 130mm field of view, it's really great for full body portraits. I just prefer the look of this for portraits in general, but that is, of course, given that you have the space to use it. That's the trade-off, is you have to be pretty far away from your subject to use this lens, but whenever you can do that, the results are great. It's obvious I have this because I can't afford the Fujifilm 90mm f2. One day in a perfect world, if you know, that'll eventually happen where I just have every lens that I want, hopefully. But this is in place of my 90mm f2 that it will eventually come, hopefully. But this is a really great lens. The only problem is that sometimes the autofocus is not that accurate, so I have to take a lot of pictures and make sure it's focusing. But whenever it's in focus, very sharp. I like it better than the 56 1.4, even though this is a 1.8, but that doesn't matter because you have the compression, so the background blur is not a problem. It's just a better look for portraits in my opinion. It is a more impractical field of view, so you have to have more space for it. You basically need to shoot it outside or in a large room to use this lens, or and if you're just walking around, it's a lot harder. It's like specifically a portraiture focal length. The 56 1.4, you can kind of use it for walk around as like a short telly, but once you're getting to this point of I don't know, 130 millimeters, it's kind of like a weird walk around focal length. It's really only a portrait lens. At that point, if I wanted the telephoto lens, I'd want to zoom. I want some versatility, so it's weird for walk around. Really just for portraits, but excels at that. That's enough praise of that lens. I probably got the most praise, and it's not even a first-party Fuji lens. Next, we're on to manual focus lenses. So this is the Pergear 12mm f2. I'm restarting at the widest at every new set of lenses. So the 16 was the widest in my autofocus lenses. This is the widest in my manual focus lenses. A lot of these will have either been sent to me or I buy a manual focus lens to try out a focal length. That was the case with this 12mm. I wanted to try out ultra wide. It's basically useless at f2. It looks awful. It's very soft at f2. And the corners aren't that great, even stopped down, but this does get acceptable images. When I first bought this a long time ago, I've had this for well over a year, which is a long time for some lenses for me. I didn't like it because it was a really hard focal length to use, especially for a new photographer. And the image quality wasn't that great because I was shooting at f2, not really realizing that you might as well shoot an ultra wide lens at like f8 to get everything in focus. It doesn't really make sense to shoot it at f2. Once I learned a little bit more about photography and different focal lengths, I figured out a better way to use this, and I did recently go out with it and get some pictures of this car and some other things that I really liked with the ultra wide field of view. I will come back to it, and I'll keep this for a while, but I might eventually replace it with a Viltrox 13mm f1.4. I do like Viltrox lenses, the 85 a lot more than the 56. I haven't tried any of the other ones, but I'm not really interested. I have Fujifilm lenses at those focal lengths. This is the TT Artisan 23mm f1.4. A lot of lenses that, like TT Artisan, 7 Artisan lenses that I talk about on this channel are sent to me. This one, actually, I bought a Fujifilm XM1 because I wanted a small camera again. I sold off my XE2 to my friend who wanted to get their first camera. And this came on the Fujifilm XM1, and I actually really like this lens. It's pretty fast. It's a usable focal length. I don't have a 23mm in an autofocus lens because I have a Fujifilm X100 upstairs. This isn't about my cameras though, this is about my lenses. And this is great. It actually has really good image quality, but it does have really awful field curvature. So your plane of focus is not flat, like these lenses are all lined up. It would be like a bow, like a U or something. The field curvature, you want a flat plane of focus generally, or you want a flat plane of focus, period, unless for some specific reason. So field curvature is an optical imperfection, and this has it real bad, but you only see it sometimes in specific situations. Other than that, really great lens. Is less than $100, especially for the price, it's really great. This lens is another TT Artisan lens that was sent to me. This is the 50mm f0.95. So this is a portrait specific focal length. It's kind of like the same thing as this 56 1.4, except faster, so blurrier backgrounds, a little bit less telephoto, so 50 instead of 56, and manual focus. But I just got this the other day. I am going to be reviewing this on the channel. It was sent to me by an Amazon seller of this lens, and it's better than the 7 Artisan's 50mm 0.95, which I did sell. It's lighter, but it's also really soft. I just don't think I like 0.95 lenses. The 1.4 is the sweet spot if you want a fast lens, in my opinion. 7 Artisans 60mm f2.8 macro. This is my macro lens. I've only ever owned 2 dedicated macro lenses. That is the 7 Artisan 60mm, and I also owned a TT Artisan 40mm f2.8. That was also great. It's hard to mess up macro lenses, so I hear that just the optical formula for macro lenses are hard to mess up and have chromatic aberration and softness. They're always usually super sharp just by the nature of what a macro lens is. But I would say that this 7 Artisan 60mm and the TT Artisan 40mm were equal in terms of image quality, but I did like the longer working distance of this for a macro lens. The longer focal length means I can be farther away when I'm shooting something up close, and still I don't have to be right up on it to get it to fill the frame, you know. But the TT Artisan 40mm f2.8, the problem with that is that it had internal reflections, so if a light would hit the lens in a certain way, the inside of the lens wasn't made to not bounce the light around, so it would just bounce around inside the lens instead of going through and make a really hazy, awful looking image. So I kept this one and sold the TT Artisan, even though it was smaller and lighter. This one just is better, and I only shoot macro sometimes, but this is my lens of choice when I do. It's always really great. So yeah, I own 2 TT Artisan lenses and 1 7 Artisan's lens. I've owned a lot of 7 Artisan's lenses and sold them all, so I do think that has something to do with the TT Artisan lenses. I do favor them over the 7 Artisans. Okay, that's all of my Fujifilm manual focus lenses, and now we're off to the vintage lenses, and this will be the quickest segment here at the end, because I don't even have any image samples from this lens. This is a Super Carinae 35mm f2. This was the lens that was on my grandma's Chinon SLR M42 camera. This lens is just really not great. It does focus pretty close, especially for a vintage lens, but the manual focus is like super stiff, and it just, you could tell it's not very well made. It was probably a cheap lens back in the day. But that doesn't mean that my gram didn't have great lenses too. This is the best lens that she had out of any of her vintage lenses, her M42 lenses, which is why this is the only one that I have This is the only one I have the M42 to Fuji X-mount adapter on, so I can actually throw this on my Fujifilm cameras. This is also a 35mm f2.8. It doesn't focus as close as that, but it's significantly better built. It's a Camaro 35mm f2, I already told you that. But the bokeh on this is actually very interesting. It does have textured bokeh, but I really like it, and it's super sharp, especially for a vintage lens. I'd be happy to shoot this lens in the modern day. It gives basically all of these lenses a run for their money in terms of sharpness, which is something to say for a vintage lens. But the one drawback is that the old vintage lens coatings, it is more prone to flare and less contrast, and if the light's hitting it wrong, because the modern lens coatings are better, obviously. But yeah, this is my favorite M42 lens. I'll talk about, my pap just gave me this. My grandma unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, and I was given a lot of these, but he had this one still, and he said that he wanted to give it to me. So this is an 80 to 200 zoom macro vintage lens. It's not great. I think it's actually like a Sears lens. It literally says Sears on it. So Sears and Kmart lenses, you can kind of bet that they're not going to be that great. None of these are name brand vintage lenses, but I keep them for the sentimental value. But this Camaro, this is a sleeper lens. If you can find this on eBay, you can probably find it super cheap. Camaro spelled K-A-M-E-R-O 35 2.8. Get yourself that. It's a great vintage lens. Here I saw a Angry Photographer review, what is it? Ken Wheeler, Theoria Apophysis. He has all sorts of kinds of videos, but he talked about some of the best M42 vintage lenses, and he really spoke highly about this Auto Yashinon 5cm/50mm f2. And so I bought one off of eBay, but it looks like somebody took it apart and put it back together wrong. It's like crooked, and no matter where I am in the focus throw, the image that it produces is not in focus. I ended up getting my money back from the seller, and they didn't even ask me to ship it back, so they must have known that it was messed up and just hoped I wouldn't notice. But now this is just basically a paperweight. It doesn't do anything, so that I guess I just keep it, because why throw it out? Maybe I don't know. I don't take lenses apart, but I could use it for parts maybe. Then finally, the last M42 lens from my grandma, a Carinae, so the same as the super cheap 35 2.8, but this one's like a little bit better, even though it's like still cheap. Karen 135 f2.8. So this is a portrait lens. Basically, these M42 lenses. These are made for 35mm film, which would be a full frame sensor. All these other lenses are for my APS-C cameras, which are actually a little bit smaller than a full frame sensor. So their equivalencies are different on the Fujifilm cameras, but the crop factor is a whole different discussion. So this is basically the same thing as this lens, except this lens is faster. So this 85 1.8 is the same field of view basically as this 135 2.8, just on their respective systems. And yeah, this is also not a great lens. It has awful chromatic aberration. I should actually take some portraits with it. It would probably be pretty good, but I haven't taken the time, and actually the aperture doesn't close down, so I have to shoot it wide open, so it's useless for anything other than portraits. All right, that's all for this video. I've covered all my lenses. I'm tired of talking at this point. It's just been nonstop talking, so I hope you've enjoyed this lens. I hope you enjoyed this review. And leave a like if you did. Leave a comment down below. Do you like any of these lenses? You rip into me if you want about a lens that I've sold that you're mad that I sold, or don't. But if you do that, it helps actually on the algorithm. So yell at me, sure. That's all I gotta say. I can go into any of these more in the future. I've reviewed a lot of these, or I'm on my way to reviewing a lot of these. But a lot of these vintage lenses I can leave except for the Camaro. I will do a video on this someday, but no one's gonna search that, so no one's gonna watch the video, but I'll still do it for fun. That's all I gotta say. Like I said, leave a like, leave a comment. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.